She didn't fall onto the hook, she was lifted into it alive. That's how the records describe her. A woman dragged up the stone steps of a church tower in Münster, Germany in 1535. The executioner held an iron hook the size of her forearm. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for a confession. He shoved the single curved spike through the soft base of her collarbone and hung her like a piece of butchered meat. She screamed for 3 days. By day 5 she could only whisper. On day 8 her body finally gave up. But here's what people never understand. Her death wasn't unusual. It wasn't even considered excessive. That hook, the executioner's hook, was a fully legal judicial instrument used across 7 European countries for more than 600 years. It appeared in official law books. It required a license to operate. Every use was documented, signed, filed, and approved by government officials who claimed it served public order. And before I go deeper, before I show you the 3 methods of hooking Hollywood always gets wrong, if your stomach is already tightening, hit subscribe. Because the next few minutes aren't entertainment. They're exhumations. Now let's go back. It's the year 1276, Nuremberg, Germany. The air stinks of sewage, sweat, and anticipation. Hundreds of people crowd around a raised wooden platform in the center of the marketplace. This isn't a beheading. It's not a hanging. Today they're about to witness a revolution in state-approved torture. The debut of Europe's newest judicial device, the executioner's hook. You have to understand what this moment meant. Until now, torture belonged to the battlefield, chaotic, messy, improvised. But the 13th century changed everything. European courts made a decision that still echoes through modern justice systems. Move torture out of war and into the courtroom. Make it orderly. Make it repeatable. Make it professional. The hook wasn't invented for passion or cruelty. It was invented for policy. Lawyers of the time called it an intermediate punishment, the perfect halfway point between whipping and execution. Too brutal for petty thieves, not brutal enough for those sentenced to die. It existed in that horrifying middle ground where the goal wasn't death, but suffering. And you need to hear this clearly. The hook wasn't crude medieval barbarism. It was engineered. Each device had 4 curved iron prongs, each one bent inward at a mathematically measured angle. Executioners didn't improvise. They trained for years, studying anatomy with a surgeon's precision. They learned exactly where to insert a hook for maximum pain and minimum fatal damage. They were professionals, the first medical practitioners of state-mandated agony. And they weren't operating in the shadows. They kept records. Hundreds of pages survive today in German archives. Dates, names, crimes, exact insertion depth, duration, medical outcome. Signatures of mayors, magistrates, priests. Every torture session was documented like an office report. Society didn't hide this. Society normalized it. 3 types of hooks existed, each with its own legal purpose. The throat hook, the rib hook, the suspension hook. But before I reveal all 3, before you understand why victims sometimes stayed alive for 12 hours straight, you need to understand the one thing Hollywood always gets completely, unforgivably wrong. It made every scream impossible. Asterisk asterisk. Imagine this. You're the woman dragged onto the platform in 1276. You're shaking. You've been told your crime, petty theft. Not enough to kill you, but enough to correct you. The executioner approaches with something that looks like a fishing tool forged in hell. 4 prongs, each about 3 inches long. They glint in the sun. The crowd leans in. They paid their admission, 1 to 3 pennies per person. Today's suffering is a public event. He places the hook under your jaw, in that soft, vulnerable space beneath your tongue. And then, he pulls. The metal punches upward, ripping through the floor of your mouth, locking behind your jawbone. Your vision flashes white. The taste of blood fills your throat, but you can't swallow it. The hook won't let you. You gag. You choke. You stay awake. Then he attaches the chain and lifts you. You rise to your tiptoes. Your entire weight presses downward while the hook forces upward. Every breath becomes a negotiation. You're not dying. You're not allowed to. This is where Hollywood lies. People imagine screaming, thrashing, dramatic agony. But the hook closed the airway at the perfect angle to allow just enough airflow for life, but not enough for a scream. Victims didn't wail. They wheezed. They rasped. They made a sound executioners called the whisper. This is why the throat hook earned its nickname, the whisperer. We know these details not from rumor, but from the diary of Franz Schmidt, Nuremberg's most meticulous executioner. From 1573 to 1617, he documented 361 executions and over 300 hook punishments. His notes weren't emotional. They were cold, medical, exact. And here's the detail historians buried for centuries, the one that shows how scientifically cruel this device really was. Executioners heated the hooks first. Red hot. Not to increase pain, but to cauterize the wound instantly, sealing blood vessels, preventing the victim from bleeding out. Because dead victims were failures. Alive victims were revenue. More suffering meant better entertainment. More entertainment meant bigger crowds. And bigger crowds meant more money for the city. This wasn't punishment. This was business. And we've only reached the first type of hook. The throat hook was the mild version. The introduction. The appetizer before the real horrors. You're not ready for the rib hook. And you're definitely not ready for the suspension hook. The one so barbaric that a queen who witnessed it banned the practice on the spot. But that's coming next. For now, tell me in the comments. Could you survive even 5 minutes with the whisperer? Because the woman in 1535 survived 8 days. And she wasn't the last. Vendors pushed through the crowd carrying baskets of warm bread and pitchers of watered wine, shouting promotions over the screams echoing from the platform. Children darted between adults, clutching wooden tokens stamped with the executioner's crest. Tokens that granted free entry for anyone under 12. This wasn't punishment. This was programming. Moral education. Parents lifted their daughters onto their shoulders and pointed toward the stage as if they were watching a choir performance, not a woman hanging from her jaw on 4 points of red-hot metal. And this is why they called the device the whisperer. Because after hours suspended by the throat hook, the victim's vocal cords didn't just weaken. They collapsed, crushed slowly until all that remained was a paper-thin whistling sound. Victims tried to scream, but nothing came out except fractured breath. Executioners leaned in close, pretending to offer mercy, pretending to listen to last confessions. Franz Schmidt, Nuremberg's most famous executioner, recorded one woman who whispered for 47 minutes while dying. 47 minutes of torn, shredded breath fighting its way up a compressed windpipe. Her final whisper. It teaches nothing. But the throat hook wasn't even close to the worst method. The real horror came next. The rib hook, the method so vicious that when a queen finally witnessed it she banned it on the spot, though Europe kept using it for almost another century. Bamberg, Germany. The witch trials are roaring through the region like a plague. Crops have failed. Livestock died. A young woman named Anna Hansen is accused of witchcraft because someone saw her talking to herself near a field. That was all it took. She is dragged to the execution platform, strapped face down onto a wooden frame polished smooth by decades of bodies. The rib hook lies beside her, a longer, thinner, more surgical-looking instrument. The executioner knows exactly where it goes, between the 4th and 5th ribs, angled upward. He places the cold metal point below her shoulder blade. Then he pushes. The hook tears into the body, splitting muscle fibers like wet cloth, sliding between ribs with horrible ease. Executioners trained for years to avoid puncturing the lungs. Death had to be slow, instructional, a public warning. The hook braced against her spine. When they lifted her, the entire weight of her body dragged downward on that single curved point buried deep inside her chest. Hanging face down, blood dripping toward the ground, she tried to inhale. Every breath made the hook grind against bone. Her ribs began to separate from her spine. She stayed conscious for all of it. Victims of the rib hook usually died within 2 to 6 hours. Not from blood loss. Not from shock. But from a mixture of slow suffocation, internal bleeding, and the sheer mechanical tearing of the body under its own weight. From 1626 to 1631, during the Bamberg witch trials, over 400 people were executed. 63% of them died by rib hook. That's 252 women. Only one written testimony survives. A woman whose torture was interrupted when her accuser confessed to lying. Court scribes recorded her description. My ribs peeled away from my spine like fruit skin pulled from its flesh. Modern forensic specialists have studied these accounts. Their conclusion? Victims stayed conscious for most of their agony. The executioners were too skilled. The placement avoided major arteries and kept the brain oxygenated just enough to ensure extreme suffering without early death. But everything changed in 1755. Maria Theresa of Austria, one of Europe's most powerful rulers, requested to witness a rib hook execution herself. She believed a monarch should understand the justice system she governed. She brought her confessor, her personal physician, and stood hidden behind a wooden lattice. For 6 hours she watched. She watched the insertion. She watched the lifting. She watched the slow deforming of the rib cage under strain. She watched a human being break apart in real time. Her diary entry from that night, now preserved in Vienna's archives, contains only one line. "I have seen hell's machinery. God forgive us." Within a week she banned the rib hook in all Habsburg territories, modern Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, parts of Italy, and Poland. But here's the part historians gloss over. She did not ban the throat hook. Not until 1776. Even a queen horrified by what she witnessed could not bring herself to strip the legal system of all hook-based punishments. The device was too embedded, too normalized, too deeply woven into law, religion, and social control. Meanwhile, in Protestant German states, the rib hook remained perfectly legal. In fact, after Maria Theresa's ban, Protestant territories doubled down, using it 147 documented times between 1755 and 1847. Most of the victims were women accused of adultery, heresy, infanticide, or rebellion against marital authority. But nothing in Europe, including the throat hook or rib hook, compares to the final method. The suspension hook. The method so brutal, so politically explosive, that it helped spark a war. And its most famous victim, a woman, still hangs above the streets of Münster today. Those iron cages dangling from St. Lambert's Church in Münster? Tourists photograph them without knowing what they are. Without knowing that they mark the final resting place of 3 Anabaptist rebels. One of them was a woman named Hilfiken, one of the only female victims of the suspension hook whose name survived the purge of historical documents. The Anabaptist rebellion had transformed Münster into a fortress city. A radical sect declared it the New Jerusalem, and prepared for the end of the world. When Catholic and Protestant forces united to crush the uprising, Hilfiken refused to betray her beliefs. Her sentence? Death by suspension hook. And a permanent public display of her body. The suspension hook was designed differently, longer, heavier, meant to hold an entire body for days. Hilfiken was lifted into it alive. Her body hung high on the church tower as crowds gathered below. She remained there even after death, her flesh rotting, bones contorting, the city forced to watch until her remains finally deteriorated. Those cages still hang today. Silent. Untouched. A relic of the darkest execution method Europe ever normalized. And the most disturbing part? History erased most evidence of suspension hook executions for more than 2 centuries. Deliberately. Because what happened next, what those hooks triggered, nearly tore Europe apart. It's built to slide through the body, not cleanly, not surgically, but deliberately wrong. A spike driven just above the collarbone, or hooked deep into the hip bone so escape is impossible unless your own body rips itself apart. And once it's in, you're not dropped. You're hoisted, slowly, up the side of the tallest church tower like a human banner of punishment. Some victims hung there for hours. Hilfiken hung for 8 days. We know because people wrote about her. Priests, merchants, soldiers. Thousands of witnesses who gathered every sunrise to watch her body lose its fight. 10,000 people came, every day, to listen to her prophecy on day 3, whisper on day 5, and finally fall silent on day 8. But even then they didn't lower her. Her corpse stayed there for 6 more weeks, rotting in the wind, turning into a black silhouette you could see from miles away. After that, they locked her bones inside one of the iron cages you saw earlier, where she hung for another 50 years. Protestants printed pamphlets showing her twisted body and called it Catholic cruelty. Those images fueled rage, fear, and violence across Europe. Historians say Hill's execution helped ignite the 30 Years' War, a conflict that killed 8 million people. One woman. One hook. One execution that burned an entire continent. But this is where the story becomes even darker. Because the same device that destroyed bodies, eventually saved them. Modern surgical retractors, the metal tools that pull open flesh in hospitals, were developed from the executioner's hook. An 1847 German medical manual openly labeled them as modified suspension instruments. Executioners, men who spent centuries tearing the human body apart, accidentally became the founding fathers of modern anatomy. Their diaries became medical textbooks. Schmidt's journal, the one where he recorded 345 hook executions, was used in universities until 1903. Now here's the moment I warned you about, the final descent into the part of this history most people never hear. The last woman ever executed by hook didn't die in medieval Germany. She died in Philadelphia in 1866, and they photographed it. That photograph was hidden from the public for 90 years. When it was finally released in 1956, newspapers refused to print it without warnings. Debates exploded across the country. People called it the most horrifying image of a legal execution ever recorded. June 8, 1866, Philadelphia County Prison. The condemned, Bridget Dan, a 34-year-old Irish immigrant housemaid. Whether she actually committed the murders she was accused of is still debated today. But the warden chose her method of death personally, and he chose the hook. 3,000 people crowded outside the prison walls as the execution began. 12 newspapers sent reporters. And the executioner? He had never used a hook in his life. All he had were German manuals, written by men long dead. He placed the hook under Bridget's jaw. He pulled. It tore through her skin but missed the bone. She collapsed, still conscious, blood pouring down her dress. He tried again. The prongs caught, but one snapped off from the force. The crowd outside could hear her screams. 2 hours passed. 2 hours. On the third attempt, the hook finally held. They lifted her into the air, and she hung for 40 minutes until her body went still. Newspapers called it a medieval disaster performed in an industrial age. One editorial declared, "We have proven ourselves more savage than our ancestors." The country erupted. Within 48 hours, Pennsylvania banned all non-hanging executions. 2 years later, the Geneva Convention cited Bridget Dan's death as evidence for banning archaic torture devices worldwide. 7 countries rewrote their capital punishment laws because of her. One woman's death ended 6 centuries of hook executions. In 2003, the very hook used on Bridget appeared in a private Boston auction. Museums refused to buy it. The Smithsonian issued a statement. Too disturbing for educational display. And now we've reached the part you're not expecting. Because Bridget Dan's photograph, the real, original execution image, wasn't the only one. There is another photo. One historians don't publicly discuss. One that suggests she wasn't the last. And that's where part 4 begins. Remember that museum heist I teased at the start? This is where everything stops being history and starts feeling alive. Rothenburg, Germany. The Medieval Crime Museum. 3 executioners' hooks, real ones, documented, used, vanished in a nighttime break-in so precise it looked military. No smashed glass, no alarms, no fingerprints. Whoever did it bypassed modern security like it was nothing. They ignored gold, artifacts, weapons, manuscripts. They took only the hooks. Walked in. Walked out. And disappeared. Police called it an occult-motivated theft. Investigators quietly admitted something worse. The hooks have surfaced on the dark web. $50,000 each. A private underground market for devices designed to kill human beings, bidding wars, encrypted auctions, collectors who don't just want artifacts, they want instruments of pain. And it forces you to confront a terrifying truth. The executioner's hook was never some anomaly. It wasn't a temporary madness or a fringe cruelty. It was culture. It was law. It was justice. It was public entertainment for 600 years. Franz Schmidt, the executioner who killed 345 people using hooks, blades, fires, wheels, ended his life's diary with a single line. The hook teaches nothing. It only satisfies rage. That came from a man who spent 4 decades turning human suffering into state procedure. Because the hook wasn't rare, wasn't secret, wasn't condemned. It was normal. Western civilization used it, legally, longer than many countries have existed. And here's the part people don't want to admit. It wasn't just cruelty, it was considered science. A form of anatomy. A public demonstration of how flesh tears, how joints separate, how pain unfolds across time. Even today, human rights organizations use the executioner's hook as case study number 4 in their training modules. Why documentation matters? Because we know exactly how many people it killed. Exactly how long they hung. Exactly what they screamed. Exactly what crowds did while watching. The records don't allow us to pretend any of it was exaggerated. And the physical evidence is still there. Those rusted iron cages, the ones that once held corpses, still hang on the church tower in Münster. Germany could have removed them. They debated it, protested it, proposed it, but they decided to keep them. Every day the city looks up and sees its own past staring back. And that brings us to the question nobody agrees on. Should the remaining executioners' hooks be displayed in museums? Should the world be forced to look directly at the devices humans engineered for slow, deliberate suffering? Or does displaying them turn victims into spectacle again? Another twisted attraction for morbid tourists? I want you to answer that. Because I genuinely don't think there is a right answer. And now, before we close, the cliffhanger. Next week, I'm investigating the Iron Maiden, the infamous metal sarcophagus lined with spikes. The torture device every horror book, movie, and documentary claims was real. But I found something in the German archives. Letters, blueprints, museum records, and what they reveal. The Iron Maiden you think existed might never have been used at all. Its entire history may be a Victorian lie, invented, marketed, sold, and displayed for profit. And the truth I uncovered? It's darker than if it had been real. Make sure you're subscribed. Because next week's story makes the hook look civilized.